If your SP is silent, understand this first. Nothing has gone wrong. Silence is not rejection, absence, or loss. Silence is a mirror, and mirrors do not create, they only reflect. What you are witnessing on the outside is simply the echo of an inner state that has been impressed, accepted, and played out with perfect obedience. The outer world never speaks first, it answers, and sometimes its answer comes as stillness. You have been trained to fear silence. You have been taught to read it as disinterest, distance, or the end. But silence has no meaning of its own. Meaning is always a sign from within. The moment you decide that silence means abandonment, the state of abandonment is entered, and the world faithfully continues the performance. The moment you decide that silence means reflection, reorganization, or inevitability, the world must rearrange itself to match that assumption. You must stop reacting to what you see and start understanding what you are being shown. Silence appears when attention has been withdrawn from certainty and placed on waiting. Waiting is not neutral. Waiting is a state. It implies lack. It implies not yet. And the world has no choice but to reflect that inner posture by delaying the response you seek. Your SP is not silent because they have stopped thinking of you. They are silent because the version of you they are responding to is the one who is checking, wondering, interpreting, and emotionally leaning outward. When you lean outward, the world leans back. When you chase movement, you meet stillness. When you search for proof, proof is withheld. This is not punishment. This is law. The outer person you call your SP has no independent power to decide when or how they show up. They move according to the role you assign them in consciousness. If they appear distant, it is because the inner conversation you are having with them is distant. If they are quiet, it is because the inner dialogue has shifted from fulfillment to monitoring. Ask yourself honestly, when they went silent, did you begin to speak to yourself differently? Did you begin to rehearse explanations, justifications, fears, or imagined conversations where you were seeking clarity? The moment you did, the state changed, and the world followed. Silence is often the bridge between two states. It appears when the old assumption is dissolving, but the new one has not yet been stabilized. The mind dislikes this gap and tries to fill it with noise, questions, doubts, techniques, effort. But the bridge collapses under effort. It is crossed by assumption alone. You do not manifest contact by trying to make contact happen. You manifest contact by becoming the version of yourself for whom contact is normal, expected, and unremarkable. The moment communication feels ordinary in imagination, it must become ordinary in experience. Consider this carefully. When something is truly yours, you do not watch it. You do not wait for it. You do not check for signs. You assume it. And assumption is creative. Your SP's silence is not a wall. It is a pause created by your awareness shifting from being to observing. Observation delays creation. Being accelerates it. You were never meant to figure out how or when. The mind wants timelines, explanations, and guarantees. But creation does not respond to logic. It responds to identity. Who are you being while you notice the silence? The one who is chosen, secure, and desired, or the one who is hoping to be? Hope is not faith. Hope looks forward. Faith lives from, if you were already the one they wanted, how would you feel during silence? You would not label it. You would not interpret it. You would move through your day, unchanged, knowing the story continues in your favor. That inner neutrality is not indifference, it is confidence. The world cannot deny a state that is calmly assumed. Many believe they must affirm louder, visualize harder, or repeat more when silence appears. But force never creates, it only reveals resistance. Silence is your invitation to stop doing and start being. Return to the inner scene where the relationship is complete, not where it is becoming, but where it is done. Feel the naturalness of being wanted. Feel the ease of mutual desire. Do not try to make it vivid, make it familiar. Familiarity is the key that unlocks manifestation. The reason silence feels painful is not because of the other person. It is because of the identity you temporarily abandoned. You stepped out of the state of being chosen and stepped into the state of being unsure. The pain is not loss, it is misalignment. Correct the state, and the world corrects itself. Your SP cannot stay silent once you stop listening for silence. The moment your attention withdraws from absence and rests in fulfillment, the echo must change. The world is not slow, it is precise. It waits for clarity of assumption. There is nothing to fix in them. There is only something to remember in you. You were never meant to be validated by messages, calls, or actions. Those are effects, not causes. When you treat them as causes, you reverse the order of creation and place yourself at the mercy of appearances. When you remember that consciousness is the only cause, appearances lose their power. Silence often appears just before a shift, because the old story cannot continue and the new one has not yet been outwardly expressed. Do not interrupt this moment with fear. Let it pass through you without meaning. You are not waiting for them to choose you, they are waiting for you to choose yourself as already chosen. The moment you stop checking the 3D for confirmation, confirmation rushes in. The moment you stop asking why are they silent and begin living as the one who is naturally desired, the question dissolves along with the silence. You must understand this deeply. Your SP is not thinking independently of you. They are thinking from the state you occupy. When you occupy certainty, they feel certainty. When you occupy doubt, they feel confusion. When you occupy lack, they feel distance. This is not manipulation. This is unity. There is only one consciousness appearing as many. Change the assumption within, and the reflection has no choice but to comply. If you feel tempted to reach out from anxiety, pause. Ask yourself, who would I be if this relationship was secure? Would I act from urgency or from calm expectation? Then act only from that identity, even if that means doing nothing. Doing nothing from confidence is more powerful than doing everything from fear. Silence dissolves when you stop trying to end it. You do not need signs. You do not need reassurance. You do not need movement. You need alignment. Alignment is not emotional excitement. It is inner stillness. It is the quiet knowing that what is assumed is done. When you return to that knowing, the outer silence must break. Not because you forced it, but because it no longer matches who you are being. The world cannot remain inconsistent with your self-concept for long. It must either change or fade. And silence is fading. Let this be the moment you stop reacting and start remembering. Remember that you are the operant power. Remember that nothing is missing. Remember that silence is not absence, it is transition. Stand firm in the assumption that you are wanted, valued, and chosen, not as a technique, but as an identity. Wear it lightly, live from it naturally, and one day, often when you are no longer thinking about it, you will notice that the silence has ended, not because you waited well, but because you stopped waiting at all. You must also understand that silence is never random. Nothing in your experience appears without a cause within you. When the outer voice pauses, it is because an inner voice has been given more attention. And that inner voice is not your SP's, it is yours. What you've been telling yourself about the situation has more creative power than any message they could send. If the inner dialogue is filled with questions like, why haven't they replied? Or did I do something wrong? Or what if this means it's over? Then the outer world must continue to present conditions that keep those questions alive. The world is not interested in answering your fears, it is interested in maintaining your state. It will keep you asking until you change who is asking. Most people do not realize that imagination is not something they do for a few minutes and then return to reality. Imagination is reality. It is the place where every relationship exists before it appears in form. When you imagine distance, you live in distance. When you imagine connection, you live in connection. The physical confirmation is always secondary. Silence feels unbearable only when you believe the power to move the situation exists outside of you. The moment you reclaim that power, silence loses its emotional charge. It becomes neutral. And neutrality is the doorway through which fulfillment enters. Notice how the mind wants to assign blame during silence. It wants to blame timing, circumstances, third parties, or even yourself. Blame is just another way of saying, I am not the cause. And the moment you deny being the cause, you deny your ability to change the effect. You are not meant to control people, you are meant to control states. When the state changes, the people change automatically. There are moments when silence appears because the old version of you, the one who chased, overgave, waited, and doubted, is no longer being sustained. The world pauses because it is recalibrating to your next assumption. If you rush back into the old identity out of fear, the silence extends. If you remain still in confidence, the recalibration completes. This is why effort feels exhausting. You are trying to move the mirror instead of the face. Ask yourself gently, who am I being when I think of them now? Am I the one who is already secure in their place? Or am I the one who needs reassurance to feel safe? You do not need to judge the answer. Awareness alone begins the shift. The state of being wanted does not feel intense. It feels calm. It feels normal. It feels boring to the anxious mind because there is nothing to fix, nothing to chase, nothing to monitor. And because it feels so ordinary, the mind often rejects it, thinking something must be done. But creation happens in the ordinary assumption, not the emotional peak. You do not need to convince yourself that they will reach out. Convincing implies resistance. You simply rest in the feeling that communication is part of your identity. It is natural for people who are chosen to be contacted. It is natural for relationships that are secure to flow. You do not affirm these things to make them true. You assume them because they already are within you. Silence is also a test, not from the world, but from yourself. It reveals whether you trust your inner knowing or depend on outer validation. The world will continue to test you until you pass by remaining faithful to your assumption without proof. This is not about pretending you do not care. It is about caring from fullness instead of lack. When you care from fullness, you are not destabilized by temporary appearances. You understand that what you have assumed must express itself in time. Time is not your enemy here. Time is simply the interval between assumption and visibility. The interval shortens when you stop interfering with doubt. You interfere every time you check, analyze, stalk, reread old messages, or imagine worst case scenarios. These actions are not harmless, they are declarations of identity. They say, I am someone who is uncertain. And the world replies, very well, here is more uncertainty. Withdraw from these habits not as discipline, but as self respect. Ask yourself what kind of person you would be if this relationship was stable and mutual. That person would not need to monitor silence. They would be living. When you return to living, the world returns to responding. There is also something important to understand about desire. Desire does not mean you lack. Desire is the movement of consciousness toward fuller expression. But when desire turns into attachment, it slows creation. Attachment says, I cannot be whole until this happens. And the world reflects that incompleteness. Completion must come first. Feel yourself complete now. Not because you no longer want them, but because your worth and identity were never dependent on their actions. From that completion, desire becomes magnetic instead of needy. Silence dissolves quickly when you no longer need it to end in order to feel okay. The outer world is incredibly sensitive to your inner posture. The slightest shift, from hoping to knowing, from waiting to expecting, from needing to assuming, creates movement. But you must allow the shift to settle. Do not keep digging up the seed to see if it has grown. When you imagine conversations with your SB, notice the tone. Are you explaining yourself, defending your worth, seeking reassurance, or are you relaxed, confident, and already secure in the connection? The tone matters more than the words. Your inner conversations are the blueprint. The outer conversation cannot contradict them for long. If you truly understood that what you imagine is what you experience, you would be far more selective with your inner speech. You would stop replaying silence and start replaying presence, not forcefully, not obsessively, but naturally, as one who knows how the story ends. The story always ends where you decide it ends. Do not be afraid of letting go of control. Control belongs to the anxious self. Authority belongs to the aware self. Authority does not rush. It assumes you are not behind. Nothing has been delayed beyond repair. Silence has not ruined anything. It has simply exposed what you believe about yourself and relationships. And what can be seen can be changed. Remain faithful to the version of you who is already in communication, already desired, already secure. Not in bursts, but consistently. Consistency is what impresses consciousness. Let the outer world catch up, and as you move through your days, carry yourself as one who expects harmony, not as one who hopes for it. Expectation is quiet, hope is restless. Choose quiet. From that quiet, everything rearranges. Understand this as well. Silence is often misunderstood as inactivity, but internally, movement is always happening. What you do not see is never proof that nothing is occurring. The unseen is the womb of all visible change. When you accept this, impatience dissolves. You stop demanding evidence and start allowing expression. The need to figure it out is another form of mistrust. You are not meant to analyze the process, you are meant to occupy the outcome. Analysis keeps you mentally present with the problem, while assumption places you mentally in the solution. The world only responds to where your awareness rests most naturally. If your awareness keeps returning to the question, why are they silent? Then that question becomes your dwelling place, and wherever you dwell, you live. But if your awareness gently returns to the feeling of being secure, valued, and wanted, then that becomes your home, and the world must reflect your residence. You must stop treating silence as an emergency. Emergencies demand reaction, and reaction always reinforces the state that produced the emergency. Calm dissolves what panic sustains. Notice how the body responds when you think of silence. Tightness, heaviness, restlessness, these are signals that you have stepped into a state that does not belong to the version of you who has what they desire. The body never lies. Use it as guidance, not as proof of failure. When you return to a relaxed assumption, the body follows. And when the body follows, the world soon echoes it. It is not your job to make yourself believe something new. It is your job to stop believing what hurts you. Drop the assumption that silence means danger. Drop the belief that time is working against you. Drop the story that you must do something to fix this. Creation does not require effort, it requires consent. Consent is saying, "This is how it is for me now," and resting there without argument. If you consent to being someone who is naturally desired, the world must organize itself around that consent. Your SP cannot remain silent in the face of a state that assumes connection as normal. Silence cannot survive where communication is expected. But expectation must be clean. It cannot be mixed with doubt. You cannot expect while secretly watching for disappointment. That watching is another assumption. Let expectation be quiet. Let it feel almost invisible. There is a reason why silence feels loud when you focus on it. Attention amplifies everything. What you withdraw attention from weakens. What you repeatedly notice strengthens. Still, ends is not strengthened by their lack of action. It is strengthened by your observation of it. Stop feeding it with meaning. Meaning is power. Give meaning instead to the idea that things always work out for you, that people naturally return, that connections deepen rather than fade. These are not affirmations you chant, they are perspectives you live from. When these perspectives become natural, the outer world reorganizes effortlessly. Do not confuse detachment with indifference. Detachment is simply trusting the unseen. It is knowing that you do not need to micromanage life for it to serve you. It is choosing inner peace over outer proof. The moment inner peace becomes more important than getting a message, you have already shifted the state, and the world must respond to that shift. You are not meant to sit and wait in stillness. You are meant to move forward in life while carrying a settled assumption. Live fully, engage with your day, let your identity be larger than this one situation. Expansion collapses silence faster than obsession ever could. When you expand, you stop shrinking yourself around one outcome, and paradoxically, that is when outcomes rush toward you. Silence thrives when you pause your life for it. It dissolves when you refuse to put your joy on hold. You do not attract by staring at the door, you attract by becoming the one everyone wants to walk toward. Be mindful of how you speak about the situation, even internally. Saying they're not talking to me reinforces the experience of being unheard. Saying things are always moving in my favor reinforces ease. Words are not magic, but states are, and words reveal states. Choose words that feel true to the version of you who is secure. If you find yourself wavering, do not fight it. Gently return. Effort creates friction. Ease creates flow. Even returning again and again is part of stabilizing a new identity. There will be moments where silence tries to pull you back into old assumptions. These moments are not setbacks, they are invitations to choose again. Every choice strengthens the new state. Remember, manifestation is not about changing circumstances, it is about changing residence. Where do you live mentally? In lack or in fulfillment, in fear or in trust, in waiting or in knowing? Where you live determines what visits you. Silence cannot visit a home that is already occupied by certainty. Allow certainty to settle slowly, naturally, without pressure. Let it become your default rather than a technique. When it becomes default, the world reflects it without delay. And as this understanding deepens, the need to monitor the situation fades. You begin to feel a subtle shift, less urgency, more calm, less attachment, more confidence. That shift is not accidental, it is evidence that you have moved states. The outer world always follows the inner one, always. And as you remain in this awareness, you may begin to notice something subtle but important. The silence no longer feels like a problem to solve. It becomes background noise, losing its emotional charge. This is not because you have given up, but because you have stopped assigning your sense of self to an external response. This inner shift is the real movement. Most people think change happens when the other person does something. In truth, change happens when you no longer need them to do anything in order to feel stable. That stability is what reorganizes the relationship. When you stop needing reassurance, reassurance appears. When you stop chasing clarity, clarity finds you. The mind may protest and say, "But shouldn't I do something?" That question itself reveals the old state. Doing is only required when being is absent, when you are being the version of yourself who is sick. Pure and desired. Action becomes unnecessary or inspired rather than anxious. You are not meant to suppress your feelings during silence. You are meant to understand them. Feelings are indicators of state, not commands to act. When loneliness appears, it is not telling you to reach out. It is showing you that you have temporarily identified with separation. The correction is not outward movement, but inward realignment. Return again and again to the sense of being grounded in yourself. Let that be your anchor rather than messages, replies, or timing. The more grounded you become, the less power silence holds. Silence also reveals how much meaning you have placed on being chosen. When your worth feels tied to someone's attention, silence shakes you. When your worth is self assumed, silence cannot disturb you. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. You were never meant to earn love, chase connection, or prove your value. Those ideas belong to an identity that has forgotten its creative nature. The moment you remember who you are, relationships reorganize naturally. The outer world is remarkably obedient. It does not argue, it does not resist, it simply mirrors. If the mirror is showing stillness, do not shout at the reflection. Change the expression. This is why inner discipline matters. Not rigid control, but gentle consistency. You do not need to hold a perfect state all day. You only need to return to it more often than you return to doubt. Dominant states create dominant outcomes. If you notice yourself imagining worst case scenarios, do not panic. Simply recognize that imagination is working and redirect it. The same faculty creating fear can create fulfillment. Imagination does not discriminate, it accepts direction. Let your inner scenes be short and natural, a feeling of ease, a sense of normal communication, a quiet knowing that things are unfolding. Do not dramatize. Drama belongs to insecurity. Naturalness belongs to truth. When something is true for you internally, you do not rehearse it endlessly. You assume it and move on. Let your desire feel like that. Assumed, not chased. Silence often persists when you are trying to get back to a state rather than live from it. There is no going back. There is only choosing now. The present moment is the only point of power. Choose now to see yourself as someone who is always met with openness and warmth, not as a hope, but as a description of who you are. Let that description guide your thoughts, reactions, and expectations. The world has no choice but to follow description. You may notice that when you truly settle into this identity, your urge to check disappears. You are no longer scanning for proof because proof is no longer needed. That absence of urgency is not loss of desire, it is fulfillment beginning to solidify. This is often the moment when the outer shift occurs, because the old state has lost its energy source. Silence feeds on attention. When attention is withdrawn, it dissolves. Do not measure progress by days or messages. Measure it by how you feel when you think of them. If there is less tension, less heaviness, less urgency, you are moving correctly. Inner movement always precedes outer change. Allow yourself to trust this process without needing to see ahead. Trust is not blind belief, it is inner rest. It is knowing that what you have assumed cannot fail to appear because it already exists within consciousness. The moment you stop negotiating with reality, reality aligns with you. And as this understanding deepens, you begin to see silence differently, not as rejection, not as distance, but as a neutral space where old assumptions fall away. In that space, you are free to choose again, without pressure, without fear, without forcing. Choose gently, choose consistently. Choose the version of yourself who no longer waits to be chosen, because being chosen is already assumed. And when you remain with that assumption, something else begins to happen that many overlook. Your inner posture toward relationships as a whole starts to change. You are no longer oriented toward proving, fixing, or maintaining connection through effort. You begin to relate from wholeness. This shift affects far more than one person, but it becomes most noticeable in the very area where silence once felt heavy. You start to sense that connection does not disappear simply because it is unseen. Just as the sun remains even when clouds pass, the bond remains even when communication pauses. This understanding removes the urgency to rescue the situation. Rescue belongs to fear, trust belongs to power. Silence often appears when you have been identifying too strongly with outcomes rather than with self. Outcomes fluctuate, self does not. When you anchor into self, outcomes stabilize on their own. The relationship does not need constant maintenance through anxiety. It needs a stable center from which it can flow. Be honest with yourself about this. When silence first appeared, did you begin to imagine yourself being forgotten, replaced, or overlooked? Those imaginal acts are not harmless. They are creative. And the world responds faithfully, not to punish you, but to show you what you are assuming. The correction is never guilt. Guilt only strengthens the old state. The correction is choice. Choose again. Choose a different imaginal act. Choose to see yourself as remembered, desired, and significant. Not because you are trying to make something happen, but because this is the identity you are willing to occupy. You do not need to argue with the mind when it brings up old fears. Arguing gives them importance. Simply return to the feeling of being centered within yourself. Let the fears pass without engagement. What you do not energize cannot persist. This is why inner silence is more powerful than outer noise. When you cultivate inner silence, calm awareness, steady assumption, the outer silence loses its meaning. And what meaning disappears, manifestation accelerates. You may notice that as you stabilize this state, memories of past communication no longer trigger longing or sadness. They feel neutral, even pleasant. This neutrality is a sign that you are no longer identifying with lack. You are no longer trying to return to something. You are living from something. Living from fulfillment feels different than reaching for it. It feels slower, steadier, quieter. It does not announce itself. And because it does not announce itself, the mind often doubts it. But the world recognizes it immediately. The world responds not to your words, not to your affirmations, but to your settled sense of self. That sense of self speaks constantly, even when you say nothing. If you find yourself tempted to check the phone, scroll, or look for signs, do not judge the impulse. Simply see it as a reminder to return inward. Ask yourself, what am I assuming right now? Then gently adjust. Assumption is not pretending. It is selecting the lens through which you experience reality. When you select the lens of being secure and wanted, the world appears accordingly. There is no need to dramatize the silence as something that must end urgently. Urgency implies danger. There is no danger here. There is only a moment of reorientation. When you treat it as such, your nervous system relaxes and the state stabilizes faster. Many people unknowingly keep silence alive by revisiting the moment it started, replaying conversations, or trying to pinpoint mistakes. This keeps awareness rooted in the past. But creation only responds to the present state. The past has no power unless you keep occupying it. Release the past by refusing to identify with it. You are not the version of yourself who was confused, anxious, or uncertain. That version was a state, not an identity. States change. Identity remains chosen. As you continue choosing yourself as the one who is naturally connected, something subtle shifts in how you perceive time. You stop counting days. You stop measuring progress. Time loosens its grip because time only matters when you are waiting. Waiting ends the moment you assume arrival. And from that assumption, the outer world rearranges in ways that feel almost incidental. Communication resumes not as a dramatic event, but as something that feels oddly normal, because internally it already was. This normality is important. The more ordinary the fulfillment feels inside, the more easily it expresses outside. Extraordinary effort produces resistance. Ordinary assumption produces flow. You do not need to prepare for the moment silence breaks. Preparation implies uncertainty. When you are certain, you are simply living. Allow yourself to live now, not as a distraction, but as an expression of trust. Trust that what you have assumed is active even when unseen. Trust that consciousness does not forget its impressions. Trust that alignment always precedes evidence. And as this trust becomes familiar, the story continues unfolding, not through force, not through waiting, but through quiet inevitability. Inevitability is the feeling you are moving toward, even if you do not yet recognize it fully. It is not excitement and it is not relief. It is a quiet certainty that does not need reinforcement. When inevitability is assumed, the mind stops searching for reassurance, because reassurance belongs to doubt, not knowing. Silence cannot exist alongside inevitability for long. It is sustained only by uncertainty. Once uncertainty dissolves, silence has no foundation to stand on. You may notice that when you stop labeling the situation as no contact or being ignored, the emotional grip loosens. Labels are powerful because they define reality. When you label something as lack, you live in lack. When you remove the label, the experience becomes neutral, and neutrality is fertile ground for change. Neutrality is often misunderstood as giving up. In truth, it is the highest form of confidence. It says, I do not need to react to appearances because I know who I am. From this position, everything rearranges with minimal resistance. The world is not impressed by emotional intensity, it is impressed by consistency of assumption. You do not need to feel perfect. You need to return to the same identity again and again until it feels natural. Naturalness is the true measure of belief. When communication is natural to you internally, it becomes unavoidable externally. But if communication feels like something you are trying to earn or restore, it remains delayed. The world mirrors effort with obstacles and ease with flow. Ask yourself this quietly. Does the idea of them reaching out feel surprising, or does it feel obvious? The closer it feels to obvious, the closer you are to expression. Surprise belongs to the state of lack. Obviousness belongs to possession. You are not trying to make something happen. You are allowing something to show up that already exists in consciousness. This distinction changes everything. There may be moments where the mind returns with urgency, saying, but what if nothing happens? That question only arises when you momentarily forget that consciousness does not fail. Nothing happens only when nothing is assumed, and you are assuming something every moment, whether you are aware of it or not. Assume wisely. You do not need to imagine dramatic reconciliations or emotional messages. Those details are not necessary. The seed is not in the form, it is in the state. A simple feeling of being secure, wanted, ND at ease is enough to move mountains. Small assumptions create large outcomes. If silence has taught you anything, let it be this: you are far more powerful when you stop reacting. Reaction hands power to appearances. Response comes from identity, and identity creates appearances. Respond to silence by becoming still within yourself, not by freezing, but by grounding. Grounding is knowing where your power resides and refusing to outsource it. The moment you stop outsourcing your sense of worth to another person's behavior, relationships begin to shift dramatically. They move from struggle to cooperation, from uncertainty to clarity. This shift is not instant emotionally, but it is immediate causally. The cause changes the moment you do. You do not need to monitor your thoughts obsessively. Obsession implies fear of doing it wrong. You cannot do this wrong if you return to self. Simply notice where you are living mentally and gently guide yourself back when you drift. Drifting is not failure, it is part of learning to remain. Remain in the feeling of being chosen without needing to prove it. Remain in the sense of connection without needing to see it. Remain in calm expectation without urgency. Expectation does not lean forward, it stands relaxed. As you remain here, you may notice that your imagination no longer creates scenarios of loss. It begins to default to scenarios of ease. This is not forced positivity, it is identity stabilizing. When identity stabilizes, behavior changes naturally. You may speak differently, move differently, think differently, not to manipulate outcomes, but because the old reactions no longer match who you are. And when behavior shifts without effort, the world reflects it with precision. Silence is never the final chapter. It is a pause between states. What determines what follows is not what the other person does, but who decide to be while nothing seems to be happening. Be the one for whom things are always unfolding, even when unseen. Be the one who trusts internal reality more than external noise. Be the one who understands that stillness is not absence but preparation, and remain there without strain, without forcing an ending, without demanding proof, allowing the law of reflection to complete its work in its own perfect order. As you stay in this understanding, you begin to notice that your attention naturally shifts away from the question of silence and toward the quality of your inner life. This is not avoidance, it is maturity of consciousness. You realize that where your attention lives determines the texture of your experience far more than any single interaction ever could. Silence loses its grip when it is no longer the center of your awareness, not because it has ended, but because it has been replaced. Awareness cannot hold two dominant states at once. When fulfillment becomes primary, lack becomes secondary and eventually irrelevant. You start to see that relationships are not sustained by constant communication, but by shared states. Two people meet not through words alone, but through resonance. When your inner state aligns with connection, harmony, and ease, resonance is inevitable. Silence cannot interrupt resonance, it only delays visible confirmation while alignment stabilizes. There is a subtle temptation during silence to rehearse future conversations where you explain how the silence made you feel. This rehearsal keeps you emotionally anchored in the past state. Gently release that habit. The version of you who is secure does not need explanations. They assume understanding without demanding it. You are not here to convince, persuade, or remind anyone of your value. Value is not communicated through effort, it is communicated through presence. When you are present within yourself, others feel it without words. Presence is felt, absence is imagined. If you examine silence closely, you may realize that much of its discomfort comes from imagined meanings rather than facts. The fact is simple: there is a pause in communication. Everything else, the stories, fears, interpretations, is added by the mind. When you remove the added meaning, what remains is neutral, and neutrality is manageable. From neutrality, you choose again. Choosing again does not mean flipping between hope and doubt. It means returning to the same assumption until it becomes familiar. Familiarity removes emotional charge. When the charge is gone, the state becomes dominant. Dominant states do not need maintenance, they maintain themselves. This is why forcing yourself to stay positive never works. Positivity is a mood, assumption is a position. Take a position and let moods pass through it without changing your ground. Your ground is the knowing that you are not forgotten, not dismissed, not unimportant. These are not affirmations, they are decisions about identity. Once decided, they do not require constant reinforcement. The outer world always lags behind inner decisions. That lag is not resistance, it is sequence. The seed is planted before the tree appears. Watching the soil does not make the tree grow faster. If you feel the urge to act from anxiety, pause and ask, what state is this action coming from? Actions taken from lack reproduce lack. Actions taken from wholeness express wholeness. Sometimes the most aligned action is stillness. Sometimes it is movement. The difference is not what you do, but who you are while doing it. Silence is often where you learn this distinction. When you stop fearing stillness, you stop fearing silence. And when silence is no longer feared, it no longer has power over you. Power only exists where attention is charged with emotion. You may begin to notice that your thoughts about your SP soften. They feel less sharp, less loaded. You think of them with warmth instead of tension. This is not distance, it is balance. Balance allows connection to flow without pressure. Pressure collapses desire. Balance sustains it. There is no need to rush the process by setting deadlines or internal ultimatums. Ultimatums belong to control. Trust belongs to authority. Authority does not threaten, it assumes. Assumption is quiet leadership of consciousness. As you lead your inner world gently but firmly, the outer world follows without argument. People do not resist your assumptions, they enact them. Silence is simply a moment where the old assumption has lost energy and the new one is gaining ground. Do not interrupt this transition with fear. Let it complete. Completion is not something you do, it is something you allow by staying consistent. Consistency does not mean perfection, it means loyalty. Loyalty to the version of yourself who knows their worth, who trusts their inner knowing, who does not collapse at the first sign of uncertainty. Each time you choose that version, even briefly, you strengthen the new state. And as the state strengthens, the world reorganizes accordingly, quietly, naturally, without announcement, continuing to unfold in ways that match who you are being rather than what you are fearing. So let this be what you are. Away with silence has never been the enemy. It was never proof of loss, rejection, or failure. It was a signal calling you back to yourself. Every pause, every gap, every unanswered moment was not happening to you, but for you, redirecting your attention from the outer world to the only place where change is born. You were never meant to chase confirmation, decode behavior, or wait for permission to feel secure. The moment you reclaim your identity as the source, everything else falls back into order. When you stop reacting, stop doubting, and stop outsourcing your power, the world has no option but to respond differently. Silence cannot survive where certainty lives. Distance cannot remain where connection is assumed. Carry this knowing forward. You are not waiting for life to choose you. You are choosing the state from which life must respond. Stand rooted in that awareness. Live from the calm confidence of already being valued, already being desired, already being connected. From that position, the story does not need effort, force, or struggle to continue. What comes next will not arrive as a miracle, but as something that feels natural, because internally it already was.